Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the Northern Kentucky Forum this evening. I'm Mark Nykirk, the director of the Scripps Howard Center for Civic Engagement, one of the partners in the Northern Kentucky Forum, along with our three public libraries in Boone, Kenton, and Campbell County. And we exist to foster civic dialogue, civil dialogue in the community on topics of interest to the Northern Kentucky region. So happy to have you with us and look forward to the day when we can do this in person again around the community. We've been in all the counties at a variety of locations, libraries, and other public gathering places. So the day is coming soon, I think, when we'll be able to do that again. We're going to talk tonight about something that's ahead for all of us, the probability of automated vehicles, self-driving cars. We have a new car in our family that I'm still getting used to. If I change the lanes without giving a signal, it reminds me by jerking the wheel back. So it always also reminds me that the day is coming when I won't have to drive it at all. I can sit and read. So at least I think that's how it works. We'll learn some more tonight. But we welcome your questions. Our speaker will talk first, and there is a Q&A function in the bottom of your screen. Put the questions there. I will monitor those so that we can get questions asked at the end. With us tonight is Mark Policinski, who directs OKI, the Regional Transportation Planning Agency that Northern Kentucky is a part of, along with the counties and cities and on the other side of the river. And Mark has a particular interest in this topic, I think both personally and professionally. It's kind of a neat thing to think about and how it will work. So I'm going to turn it over to Mark and let him talk and remind you that you can put your questions in the Q&A function. Thank you, Mark.
Good evening, and thank you, Mark, and thank you for having me here at the Northern Kentucky Forum. As I've always said, I enjoy being with people from Northern Kentucky because they are the most congenial, the smartest, and the most handsome people in our region. So I always like to be with you. Today, I want to talk to you about dramatic changes that are coming when it comes to transportation due to technology. More to the point, how this technology is going to change our lives and the fact that it's coming a lot sooner than we anticipate. I'm only going to talk about transportation technology in terms of driverless cars. There's all kinds of other technologies involving transportation that are dramatic: drones, signalization where the traffic signals actually talk to themselves, changing traffic patterns. But I want to concentrate just on driverless cars because, frankly, they're the ones that have captured the imagination of people, and they will, as I said, be here a lot sooner than what we think. I think we've all heard about driverless cars, but I think one of the questions is, how old do you think this technology is? Certainly, I would think that it's more than 5 years old, maybe 10, maybe possibly 15. But in fact, the technology goes back about 30 years. In some ways, the fact that driverless cars and its technology has been around for so long is becoming like old news. It's kind of strange to say that something that hasn't even been fully implemented is old news, but in some ways it is. Driverless cars, however, as we know, are no longer just the venue in the realm of science fiction writers or futurists. It's gone from being on blueprints and pilot programs to driverless cars have been on our city streets and our highways for many, many years. All future vehicles, Mark brought up a perfect example of autonomy and how it affected his driving when he tries to change lanes. That's autonomy. Cars are going to become more and more and more autonomous. They're going to become more and more connected as the years goes on. There's no going back. There is a true revolution that's taking place in transportation, but in more along the lines of mobility. And this upheaval that's coming is going to change our very concept of travel, and it's going to change our very concept of time. I'm going to move now to PowerPoint. if you can handle that for me, Jim, I'd appreciate it. Oh, we're already on. Got it. In the future, cars will be computers, more so than even are now. They're going to be driving us. We're not going to be driving them. Traffic lights, gas-powered engines, you're going to find those in museums. The places where we live and where we work will be altered by these new cars. And the relationship between where we work and where we live is going to change or could change very dramatically. When it comes to driverless cars, the technology is here, the investment is here, and the need is here. Let me begin with technology. In 2009, there was one driverless car program involving one car as a pilot program in the desolate roads of Arizona. Today, there are approximately 50 companies that are developing and testing this technology. They're building strategic partners with one another, spurring economies of scale, shortening development, bringing products to markets faster. Fleets of autonomous vehicles are moving goods and customers on public roads. Autonomous trucks were driving a 1,000-mile journey from Arizona to Texas over the mountains and the deserts. They did that for years. When it comes to autonomous vehicles, learning to navigate city streets with pedestrians, road work, traffic lights, and much more, the examples of this technology is even more powerful. Waymo is Google's autonomous vehicle. It just passed driving 20 million miles on city roads. 600 Waymo self-driving vehicles drive 25,000 miles each day on roads in Phoenix, Arizona. Lyft has just completed 100,000 trips in driverless taxis with paying customers on board in Las Vegas. Honda, General Motors have a new partnership to deploy driverless taxis for public use by 2021. These are historic partnerships, and they're historic advancements. We're poised now to take the next step in autonomous driving, the one which the controls for human operation are entirely absent. It won't happen tomorrow, it won't happen next year, but it's coming. And we're talking about cars that have no brakes, no gas pedal, no steering wheel. So the investment is here. The AV industry is attracting investment like nothing we've ever witnessed. The first $1 trillion was invested in this technology between 2000 and 2018. We were at a conference recently in which the speaker said that the next $1 trillion will be invested. It won't take 19 more years, but it'll be in this industry by the year 2022. The investment is occurring at the same time the cost of the technology is dropping dramatically. We've been told that the current cost of taking a fully autonomous technology and applying it in a car is between $70,000 and $200,000. But we've also been told by industry analysts that this cost could drop to as little as $5,000 as soon as 5 years. In simple terms, the driverless car is made up of two parts, and I know this is very simplified and probably oversimplified. It has a LiDAR unit which sits on top of the car, and it's LiDAR unit is a combination of laser and radar. It emits millions of laser pulses per second. The second part of that driverless car is a supercomputer, which translates the LiDAR data and instructs the driverless car how to drive. In 2012, the LiDAR unit costs around $70,000. Today, there are 24 companies that are selling them for less than $100 a unit. The supercomputer to drive an autonomous vehicle in the year 2000 was about 1,600 square feet. It cost $46 million, and its output was 1 teraflop. A teraflop is the ability to process 1 trillion bits of information per second. Well, today that supercomputer is not 1,600 square feet. It's the size of a shoebox. It doesn't cost 46 million, but costs a little under 200,000. And it delivers 9.4 petaflops. A petaflop equals 1 quadrillion operations per second. So it's 94,000 times faster than a teraflop. These dramatic shifts in technological cost bring new investment. The new investment brings about better technology. The better technology brings new investment. This whole industry is nothing more than capitalism on steroids. ARC Investment Management is a firm that focuses on disruptive innovation. And they estimated that this market, this AV industry, will be about $4 trillion by 2030. To give you some perspective, that's more than the entire global energy sector is today. The need is here. We know that we have the technology and that we have the investment. However, one of two critical questions is, will the public want to be driven by autonomous or driverless cars? This important question will eventually be answered with a resounding yes, because the benefits of the technology are too great for our society to reject. The potential benefits, they're amazing. I mean, we're talking about saving tens of thousands, millions of lives across the world. AVs have the potential to reduce serious crashes to zero, reduce congestion by 50%, make fossil fuel consumption a thing of the past, and dramatically improve our air quality. For the first time in history, everyone will be mobile, the disabled, the elderly, and many others. And autonomous vehicles will provide mobility to low-income and underserved populations to improve their access to their jobs and their education and their healthcare. However, the biggest reason people will say yes to this technology is safety. Let me be clear about safety and driverless car. Any dispassionate observation of the data shows that they are safe, but they are not safe enough for complete acceptance on our roads now. The technology, however, is advancing at remarkable rates to make them even safer. So when we talk about safety, we're not talking about today's autonomous car, but an autonomous car that's kind of right around the corner. Simple fact is that 95% of all traffic accidents are caused by driver error. It is alarming that 1.2 million people lose their lives in the world due to accidents on our roads. In America alone, it's 40,000 people are killed every year. To put that in perspective, that's the same as a Boeing 737 falling out of the sky every week for 52 weeks and crashing to Earth. Let me ask you this question. So if the American public knew that there was a technology that prevented weekly airplane crashes that killed 40,000 of their fellow Americans, I don't think they would just want the technology, they would demand the technology be deployed. Driverless cars remove the most fallible part of the equation, and that's the driver. AVs don't get tired, they don't drive distracted, they don't text, and they don't drive drunk. Speaking of human drivers, here's an example of just how bad we are at driving. We all encounter a traffic congestion in our commuting. We've come to accept traffic congestion as part of our daily routine. The scene here is all too familiar. We all sat in traffic and we blamed the traffic on construction or accidents or inadequate infrastructure. But this demonstration illustrates how we are actually looking at the, I think we have a little problem here. We're going to back up a bit. Okay, try it, see where we are, hit it. In this demonstration, 22 drivers in the scenario were instructed to maintain the same speed of 19 miles per hour around the circular track. As you can see, it takes just one driver's slight change in speed to cause an issue. The driver behind the initial car slows down further, prompting the next car back to slow down even more. This backup effect reverberates around the loop, resulting in a full-fledged traffic jam, the only cause of which is the difference in human behavior and reaction. That's right, human behavior and reaction. But when we look at driverless cars, and safety is obviously the biggest issue, but besides safety, the change will be driven by what we at OKI call found time. A AAA study says the average American spends 290 hours behind the wheel of a car every year. That's more than 7 40-hour work weeks at the office. It's been estimated by AAA that AVs could free up more than 250 million hours of commuting time. Simple fact is, for most of us, for all of us probably, driving is lost time. What would happen if you got those hours back? What would you do with your newfound time? Would you learn a new language? Would you read to your child? Would you catch up on your sleep? Would you and your business partner design a process to end world hunger? If a person can sleep, they can video conference, if they can Skype with family members while commuting, commuting is no longer lost time, it's found time. The issue, obviously, that we all kind of want to know is, okay, so when's this all going to happen? How quickly is it going to come and save us and do all these wonderful things? Well, nobody knows exactly. Driverless cars, they're here, they're being developed, they're being perfected. But when do they really reach that critical mass, if you will, so they really have an impact on our lives? I don't know, but I'll tell you this. It was between 4 and 5 years ago where NKY said we have to really start studying driverless cars. And as we went around the country and talked to experts and met with experts in various phases of driverless cars, it was a widely held belief that driverless cars would start to have a meaningful impact on our mobility around 2050. Well, now it's 4 years later, and as you talk to experts, these same experts in many regards, they tell you the time is now about 2030. The timeline has moved forward 20 years in a matter of months. Again, this is not gospel. It's just how quickly people envision this having an impact on your life and on mine. Now, having said that, this is very important to understand. There is an equation to when they will arrive that has two key conditions. First one should be pretty obvious. People have to be willing to get in a car without a driver. Even after years and millions of miles of proven safety, 7 in 10 Americans don't trust an AV. It's no wonder when there is an accident involving an AV, it remains in the headlines for a while. When those accidents are investigated, and in, I believe, it's safe to say most cases, they find that the driverless component of the vehicle was not responsible for the serious accident. That goes kind of widely unreported. But still, we have to understand, and we know that people, they're not really feeling all that confident about getting in a driverless car. But the simple fact is that as we look at driverless cars, as they become more and more, the data becomes more and more available, we will find that these cars are not only safe now, but they're getting safer, and they will be adapted to our daily commutes and our roads. Well, even if we're willing to get in a driverless car, it all comes down to this. If you really wanted to have these very positive impacts, no serious crashes, dramatic declines in deaths, a cleaner air, getting rid of fossil fuels, for that to happen, one important thing has to change. And this really is the point of the pyramid. We have to be willing to share that car with a stranger, that ride with a stranger. 75% of us, we drive to work alone. On weekends, people who do chores like you and me, the percentage is even higher. We do those chores by ourselves. Congestion is inextricably linked to the fact that we drive alone. There are estimates from a lot of analysts, they kind of coalesce around this idea, that if people were to share their rides with strangers using autonomous cars, we could see congestion cut by 50%. But again, this only happens if we share our rides with strangers. If we do not share AVs, we'll have more congestion. We'll have more parking lots and more of the societal melodies that haunt us today. Now, let's be really clear. There are a lot of investments and there are a lot of technological outcomes. There are a lot of regulations and policies that are going to shape how technology enters this marketplace, how quickly they will be adapted by us as a society. But we do know two things. The technology of transportation will change our lives when it's implemented, not just our commutes. The technology is advancing at rates never thought possible a few years ago. It's here, it's accelerating, and frankly, the world has never seen anything like it when it comes to transportation. When we talk about transportation and technology, and we talk about driverless cars, there are spin-offs that occur from driverless cars. They lead to kind of interesting questions. Will we own our cars? Will individuals own cars? After all, if you have in the future a super Uber app that guarantees that within 4 minutes, a car will pick you up at your door and deliver you to wherever you want to go, why would you own a car? We've already talked about how shared rides will offer the greatest cost savings and reduction in congestion and add a lot of the important values to our quality of life. But it's a really interesting question about whether or not Americans will give up their affinity for driving alone. We seem in this country to believe in life, liberty, pursuit of happiness, and I get to ride in my car whenever I want to by myself. How that question is answered has really, really powerful implications of determining things like the density of residential and commercial developments in the century ahead. If you think about it, how will cities and suburbs and uber suburbs and even rural areas change if people can live 70 miles away from where they work, be more productive while they're in that car for that 70-mile trip, and get there probably as fast as they do now when they only live 10 to 15 miles away? What happens to the home if we don't own cars? What happens to the garage? Are there garages in homes? What happens to the garages on homes that are already here? One of the big questions is, what happens to the future of parking lots if people are using driverless cars and don't own them? What happens to parking lots, parking garages? If you look at Crestwood Hills, if you look at Kenwood, the malls, or these large office complex, one of the things we all know is that the footprint of these parking lots and parking garages is larger in many cases than the footprint of the mall or the complex itself. So if these garages and if these parking lots disappear, what goes in their place? What would that mall look like of the future? Now, we have sat down with many of the commercial developers in the Midwest, and they have interesting thoughts about this. And I'm not saying it's going to develop this way, nor would they bet their last dollar on it, but they talk about these would become immense green spaces that would offer all kinds of amenities to communities. So it's an interesting thought of how land use would change. Even land use that I think a lot of us would agree would maybe beautify some of what we consider not really pretty parts of our communities, meaning parking lots and parking garages. The simple fact is that we also have to understand that there's a large issue when it comes to autonomous vehicles and their acceptance. There's a great amount of worry about technology. And it's certainly, when we look at the future, and it certainly hits when we talk about technology and transportation. And that is, what's the impact on our economy, particularly on our workforce? It's true, there could be many jobs that could be automated due to this new technology. At the same time, we all know, any kind of rudimentary study of what's happening in our economy, we know that there were over 1 million computer programming jobs unfilled in 2019, right before the pandemic. There were 2.4 million STEM jobs that were unfilled at the beginning of last year. Now, those are the very academic disciplines, the very focused disciplines that AV jobs are going to be built on in the future. And I think it's fair to say that if you study the history of capitalism, technological advancements yield more, not fewer jobs. But it certainly is something that our society is going to have to understand. And only when we understand the potential benefits to our workforce and to our economy will people truly embrace the idea of this technological advancement in transportation. So these are a bunch of questions that present themselves. In closing, let me be clear. These changes, they're going to happen. The technology is too advanced, it's too powerful, and it continues to develop. When it will actually have an impact on our daily lives to a great degree, that's open to question. But it certainly is coming on sooner rather than what we thought a few years ago. I'm optimistic about the impacts of this technology on our transportation, particularly as it affects people. This revolution, in a way, is going to put people before cars. It has the option of boosting everyone's quality of life, especially those who need it the most, the people who are now immobile, the people who can't get to their job because of transportation, the people who can't get to their doctor because they don't have transportation. So these are very positive things that could happen. There are going to be immense hurdles we're going to face. This is not going to be easy. But if you look at this, it's something that even if you don't fully believe in right now, please listen, read, study, and see how it's going to develop, and make your contribution as to how it should develop in your mind and in your communities. Because, as I said, the rewards of this, if we do it right, are immense, and they affect everyone in our society, particularly those who may need it the most. At NKY, here's my commercial. Every day we're looking at this transportation technology, and we want to build it out in our region in a smart way to develop a region that works for everyone. So we're optimistic. We think that we've entered a new age of mobility, and the technology is what's driving it. So thank you very much for the opportunity to spend a few minutes with you, and I'll be happy to take any questions that you might have.
See, yeah. Thank you, Mark. We have a lot of questions that are coming in, and some more I'm sure will come, but let's go ahead and get started with those. One question right off is what kind of testing is taking place in our region right now? Are we on the highway with driverless cars and just don't know it?
The answer is yes. I was fortunate enough to work with folks at UC on the purchase of their driverless car. I actually got in it. We moved around a bit, but the best example, I guess, of a driverless car is at CVG. CVG, as you no doubt know, is going to be the economic future of this region. It is going to be the e-commerce port for America. And consequently, because of what's occurring at CVG now and what's projected, they know that transportation is a very difficult nut for them to solve. It's not just how do you get goods in and out of CVG involving Amazon and DHL, but how do you get workers to the campus? And then once they're on campus, how do you move around that campus? How do you get them? If you in the future arrive at CVG as a worker and you are dropped off, I should say, at the southeast corner, and your office is on the northwest corner, you probably have a 30-minute walk. So how do you get people once they arrive to their jobs? And then what do you do with passengers? How do you get them as demands grow? How do you get them conveniently to their plane? And then how do you move people around? Excuse me, how do you move goods around? How does DHL unload all their goods to trucks? And how do you get those trucks in and out? So we've been working with CVG and UC for a couple of years now, and CVG actually has a driverless car. When they've combined with a private sector company who's using CVG's campus as a test ground for this. I've ridden in it. You go about 35 miles an hour. You stop at all the stop signs. You accelerate when a car crosses your path, it slows down. It's remarkable. I do know, though I can't speak specifically for a couple of reasons, but I do know that driverless cars are engaged on our roads. So they are out there. Don't fear these because they all have manual override. These are not the cars that are without brakes or steering wheels. So it's there. The technology is moving, and yeah, right in our backyard with UC and CVG, there's a lot of important work being done to advance the technology.
Kind of a related question in terms of thinking about this from a regional standpoint. When this happens, will it roll out sort of all at once in the nation or in regions that are best prepared for it first? What's that we're talking about something incremental and gradual or sudden?
Well, of course, the logical answer is gradually. And I think that's right. But I'm always reminded of the example of the smartphone. When the smartphone was first introduced, we were all on our flip phone. And our flip phones were basically $50 or cheap or free or whatever. And a smartphone was $1,000. And I remember vividly people saying, nobody's going to pay $1,000 for a smartphone. Well, that was not a gradual buildup to everybody using a smartphone. I can't remember how many months it took before 1 billion smartphones were sold, but it wasn't long. I think the answer is gradual, but don't be surprised if it comes on again much more quicker than you think. Here's how I think it will roll out. And I just had a conversation with somebody today about this. And I think this is kind of the prevalent thought. Driverless technology will first have an impact on cargo, on freight. It's not necessarily going to be passengers. There's a variety of reasons for that. It's a simpler trip. There's not as much safety involved in harming a piece of cargo as opposed to harming a person. And also, a lot of this cargo movements by driverless car can be done on roads that we would call wide open. They're not necessarily traversing, the cities and things like that. So the first applications will be cargo. They may tend to be in trucks that drive great distances across this country and never get near an urban area. And then as the technology is improved and as society demands it, if it does, and sees the benefits, then it'll begin to move into our passengers. Another way that would happen, to go from strictly cargo to maybe something more down the street and around the block, is through fleets. You'll see maybe Uber. By the way, Uber is driverless cars and been doing it for a while, as I said, Lyft 100,000 trips. So through fleet activity, that will be introduced to the public. So instead of driving your car around northern Kentucky into Cincinnati and back on a Friday night, you may have a driverless Uber. And everybody believes that that's where Uber wants to get. It wants to get to driverless vehicles. So it's going to be gradual. And I just kind of laid out a 3-step process there. No idea how it'll occur, but I think that's kind of how people are viewing this now. So it will be gradual. But I have a feeling that, when it hits, it's going to move very quickly. And the other thing too, you have to remember is that, again, there are 50 companies that are developing this technology. Every major car company in the world is looking at this, developing this. I mean, everybody's talking about how the major car companies are now embracing electric vehicles. They're also embracing this technology, and they want to meld them together, because every autonomous vehicle that's ever been built, is being built, or will ever be built is not run by fossil fuels. It's run by electric vehicles, by electricity. So as they move into the electric vehicle technology and they see that a car that is most adaptive to this might be very automated, you can see the two technologies merging. So that's just one man's opinion about how it could happen.
Well, whether gradual or sudden, we all, either dad taught us to drive or mom or a driver's school, and we had those challenging lessons in how to parallel park. And of course, now our camera kind of does that for us. And sometimes if you get enough investment, the car actually does it for you. But what about training? We have a question. Is there any training, or for that matter, marketing, that give people the experience of riding in a driverless car? How do we get humanly acquainted with it?
What a great question. If we knew the answer to that, we would make billions. When you talk about, the one thing that's interesting to me about driverless cars is that they're not marketing driverless cars. I mean, what they're marketing is autonomy. You brought up a great example, Mark, the car that parks itself. Okay. That's how they're explaining autonomy to the American public. Nobody is talking about marketing the driverless concept. And I think that makes sense because they're not there yet. This is too far out. But whoever asked that question really just got my mind thinking. You're right. To make that leap, for the private sector to make this leap, they're going to have to, again, get people to feel safe getting in that car. That's the first step. Getting the share rides with strangers, that's the second step, but they got to get the car first, right? So that, to me, would be a major investment that this technology would bring about. And it would only be smart for companies to do that. That is a very important thought. And I don't know, but if you, for the first time when you get in a driverless car, that you know is going to go 35 or 40 miles an hour, and it's going to be interacting with other vehicles, I just wonder what your comfort level would be. And then if you've done it once, does that mean you're fully convinced? So it may take levels of this instruction, but yeah, that's very important to seeing how this would be adapted by the general public that right now views them as being not something they want to do.
Could you give us a sense of how an automated vehicle deals with, I don't know, road construction and obstacles and detours? I live in Crescent Springs, and right now out of some of the routes that we're used to, Amsterdam has been closed for a time and another road's being rebuilt. So the normal route is not there. Does the car know this and long-term and even short-term when suddenly a detour pops up?
The best way to look at it is, the answer is yes. The answer is they are fully adaptive. When we were at the University of Michigan, they threw all kinds of things at this driverless car that we were in. I was telling Mark before we started, this driverless car went about 4 miles an hour. It was on a completely closed course with fake buildings, fake pedestrians. But no, the technology does adapt. I think the way that it strikes me as to how this would work is, do you remember when the Garmin's first came out and we bought them and we put them on our dashboard? And I remember when the first times used a Garmin, I had a very important meeting and I had to get there at 9:30 with the business people that I was trying to do a deal with. And the Garmin took me right past the building and put me in the middle of a cornfield and was telling me I still had to drive. Well, today, if you look at what's the GPS systems we have, they're far superior to what they were 10 years ago, 5 years ago. So the ability of these things to adapt, this adaptive technology, it's there. They have the ability to do that. It's not perfect. I mean, I don't mean to imply that it is. But then again, you have to remember that as it is right now, you can have a driverless car that has driver override, so the driver can move the car. That's not where, that's what the aim, and I don't think that's what your question was. It's like when they become fully adopted, will they be able to go through things like that? And the answer is yes. As a matter of fact, the technology is there now that they basically create on the run and find ways around. Is it perfect? No, but it works pretty damn well.
What you talked about this a little bit earlier, but if you could say a little more, the question has to do with where the cars are being developed and manufactured. Will the U.S. dominate this market, or is it a world market? Where's this happening the most?
Well, what's interesting is that the people building these cars are computer companies. I mean, again, I don't know of any driverless car that approaches Waymo, which is a Google car. I mean, 20 million miles. The cars are being developed by computer companies, and they may or may not combine with our traditional car companies. But I know that it's safe to say that every major car company is looking to develop looking at developments in autonomy and how to make it successfully commercial. So it's not just Ford and GM, it's Google that's building these cars. Uber, I think I can't remember, did they just entered into an agreement on driverless cars? But so the manufacturer, the technology is not confined to the big three automakers or even just European companies.
I want to ask kind of a question somewhat related to the one I asked a moment ago, but a different perspective is, what about in your job daily, you have to attend to questions about road maintenance and infrastructure. Do you think that our public expenditure on infrastructure, roads, bridges, and so forth will be greater, or will it be reduced by the onset of automated vehicles?
Well, here's one of the great advantages of a society that would be able to adopt completely safe driverless cars. You reduce, if again, but you have to share the ride with the stranger. Very quickly, you would understand you do not need any more roads. I mean, you will need some in some cases, but the idea of building super highways and adding to them, it just goes away. Because, and these estimates, they're just estimates, they're guesses. But, you can reduce substantially the amount of cars on the road if everybody shared a ride in a driverless car. They didn't own their car. If you look at traffic today in this region, okay, today, compare it to early 2020, there's no comparison. In fact, the only congestion we have in this region is due to construction, an accident, or maybe some infrastructure that really needs repair. We do not have a rush hour in this region. In most cases, there are some backups, I understand, but the comparison of our rush hour now to early 2020 is night and day. This dramatic drop in congestion, this dramatic freeing up of us all from the tyranny of rush hour, guess how much our traffic is reduced? It's been reduced about 8%. Now, if these estimates that driverless cars with people who don't own them and are willing to share rides with strangers, if they can reduce trips by 30% or 40%, why in the world are you going to need to build new roads? Question is, okay, that seems like a bunch of money is going to save. Well, there's one other thing you have to do, which goes along with this development technology, and that is that you have to make the roads smart. You have to make the roads adaptable to the new technology, because it's not just that you have driverless cars moving. These cars talk to each other. they're connected. And that's why when we talk about driverless cars, the word we may use in professional settings, we always are talking about connectivity between the cars. And that's where you get your severe crashes go to zero type of thing. So yes, if this comes full bore and is fully adopted, we have tremendous throughput on the roads we have now. The investment will still have to be made in our roads, but it'll be smart investment, if you will, and not the investment that we all kind of wonder about. When's it ever going to stop in building more and more roads and more lanes?
I have a couple of questions. I'll take them one at a time, but they're both kind of, I guess, it's kind of legacy questions, if you will. So great rite of passage for all of us is to get our driver's license. And we all have personal memories about that. Are driver's license going to be obsolete?
Well, the issue is driver's license be obsolete. What about car insurance? What about gas stations? Yeah, this is, as I said, this technology is going to change our way of life. It's not just going to change our commute. When you talk about how an economy moves in today's world, it used to be that supply chains were determined by county lines. Now supply chains are determined by continents. And if you think about all the changes that are going to take place or have taken place in the global economy, the same type of impact will occur in our personal life. There's just no way around it. Gas stations what are we going to need them for? Will they be replaced by electric charging stations? What kind of charging stations will it be? Will we ever use charging stations? Or will charging stations for electric vehicles basically be for fleets only? Because people won't own cars, companies will own cars, and they'll shuttle us around, get us to and fro. They'll move their own goods. So it just seems pretty cut and dry that things like driver's license will go away, as car insurance for individuals will go away, as will gas stations.
Since you mentioned the charging stations, we do have a question on that, so I'll go to that next. And that is, will the EV charging stations that we're installing now be abandoned infrastructure in the near future, or just what maybe they'll be done differently? What happens to this infrastructure we're building now for electronic cars in the current charging stations?
Well, I think that they'll be used. The whole question now with EV charging station, which we are very involved in studying that and what makes sense and how to deploy them, because that's a really difficult issue. But no, I think that everybody understands that you have to, when you build the technology, you have to build to the masses. And when it comes to EV charging stations, they're going to be more and more plentiful prior to, I think, the adoption of autonomous car or driverless cars. So if you think about, there's an EV charging network that's much more robust than it is now throughout the country. If you are developing a driverless car, you'll want to make sure that people who use that car, the fleet that buys it, if the individual buys it, they'll have easy access to electric charging stations. So it would seem to me that the companies will, be smart to try to build a car that can use whatever types of charging stations there are out there, or as many as possible.
What about, okay, so pretty much since I could drive, I hope that one day I could buy an old Porsche 911 and have a little fun with it. So I can relate to a question that we have about what about classic cars and people who just simply like to drive? What's the future of that? Are we going to have driving parks, or just park them and look at them?
I think it's safe to say that, particularly in America, we believe that you can't come on my property and you can't mess with my car. I think there's going to be a transition, and I think that people will be able to drive their cars along with autonomous cars. What's interesting is the autonomous car probably won't run into you, but you might run into the autonomous car. But you know, these questions are important because they get to the fabric of what we like in our lives, in our society, and not everything is technologically important to us. Nothing as far as advancement and the next biggest shiny thing is what we necessarily get our taste for life out of. And so the idea, I had a 77 Volkswagen convertible, original, everything on it. I enjoyed having that car, not because it would serve any practical purpose other than to drive to the Kroger by myself, of course, on weekends. But yeah, I think people, you know, they're going to have to look at this as they would any societal change. But no, I think there'll be room for the people to have their cars and have them drive on highways. I wouldn't want to be the politician or the public servant who said that they couldn't.
Well, you know, a little bit related to that, and also the question that you answered earlier is one of a member of our audience asks, might there be, and maybe this is a transitional situation, but might there be special lanes for driverless cars? Yeah, will we special lane for driverless cars or cargo 16-wheelers? Yeah. What's that possibly going to look like?
Yeah, particularly when it comes to cargo, there are already truck-only lanes. We're involved in a couple of projects, not in this region, to study truck-only lanes. And these lanes obviously are not what you're going to have in downtown Covington and downtown Cincinnati and downtown Newport. But these are lanes that traverse, the super highways that take goods across the Midwest and the Great Plains, things like that. But no, the idea of having a separate lane for trucks is already here and it's being investigated. Now, if you think about it, why would you have a lane for driverless cars if driverless cars are safer than cars that are not in the driverless lane? So, if driverless cars are safe and in their lane, why wouldn't you, if you're in your own car, why wouldn't you be in that lane? You'd want to be in that lane because it's safer than being with other cars that are not driverless. So it's going to take an amalgamation of ideas, and it's going to take putting these all together to figure out how do we make that transition.
Are there any?
Go ahead.
We have a question from the audience. There are any sort of first mile, last mile problems with this? In other words, yeah, in high density areas, but when you're getting out to a rural area, does this still work on that first mile, last mile?
Well, I'm assuming that the question goes to cargo. There are always first mile, last mile problems, particularly with transit to people who would use this. Let's say in an urban area, people who would need to get to their doctor's office. I mean, it's very important that they go from the door to the door. This is not something where you walk 6 blocks, get the car, and you're dropped off 6 blocks from the doctor's office. So that's very important. When it comes to first mile, last mile with cargo, one of the ways that they have hypothesized this might move, let's say that you have goods that have to get from Cincinnati to Las Vegas. So what happens is you have a truck with a driver. Even though it's fully autonomous, the driver drives it through the streets of Covington, the streets of Cincinnati, and let's say it goes to Harrison, Indiana, right across the state line. At that point, the driver gets out of the truck. Right? The driverless feature takes over and it drives across the country to right outside of Las Vegas to a city like Harrison, open spaces, not a lot of traffic. At that point, it stops. A driver gets in the driverless car and then drives it to its destination at the Flamingo Hotel. So that's one idea of first mile, last mile. Having said that, there are people who say that that technology will never be implemented that way, because the only way that that would happen is if the truck is fully safe. So why would you need to worry about putting a driver in the first mile, last mile? So take your pick.
Well, because you've been answering these questions, you sort of become the sage. So we can ask you anything, right? So
Yes.
we have a question that requires you to be the sage. When there is an accident, whose fault is it? What's insurance look like in this new model of transportation?
It's an absolute, if you want to see somebody sweat, talk to insurance people about driverless cars, because where does the liability lie? I mean, there are all kinds of issues. Does the liability lie with the car manufacturer? Does it lie with the technician who is constantly updating the car because of software patches and things like that? Yeah, I mean, it's a huge issue. And then again, there are all kinds of moral dilemmas when it comes to driverless cars. What decisions do they make? How do they make them? You can put together these horrific moral dilemmas as to what happens. But yeah, with insurance, that all has to be played out as to who bears the brunt, who is the actual one that's liable.
Could we talk about weather for a minute? We all, as human drivers, behave differently in weather. I know, if there's a big, huge, one of those blinding rainstorms, I tend to put my wipers on full blast and go slow, but other people pull over. And then black ice, which, I'm sure the technology exists to detect it, but then you have to, the car will have to decide what to do about it. Do you just, so what are the, just the weather question?
When we were at the University of Michigan, one of the things, it's kind of like technology on top of technology on top of technology, but one of the things that we saw was because of simulations, because of the power of computing right now. It used to be, in 2009, they had a pilot program with one car on the desolate roads of Arizona, and they would drive it in hot conditions, cold conditions, snowy conditions, whatever. And then they would chart, what did the car do today? Well, with the power of computing, they have simulations in which now they're driving a simulated autonomous car, and they put it through all kinds of weather so that in a day, instead of tracing one car and one condition, I can't remember the number, but it was like 32,000 variations of a car in all kinds of different situations and weather, speed, other cars, things like that. So the point is that the car will adapt, okay? Because they put them through these simulations, and then you build a car to that. The technology tells how the car is put together. But I will tell you this, there was an accident involving a driverless car because of black ice. And we were told that black ice was one of the first problems that driverless cars solved. So we've got a way to go, but they are thinking of these things, and they're adapting the technology as they go along. It's not perfect, and for this to work, it's going to have to be damn near perfect.
You have, to some extent, at least your answers, I think, have given us something to infer from this question, but let me ask it directly. We spend a lot of time thinking about mass transit, our bus systems, and you often will see comparisons to the United States in terms of our rail infrastructure for moving people. And I'm wondering, what are your thoughts about how this revolution in driverless cars will affect how we think about mass transit?
Again, the transition is not going to be soon. It's not going to be simple. and this isn't my opinion, I just give the opinion of others. They believe that this will make it very difficult for mass transit to be unaffected. Again, we look at mass transit, unfortunately, we look at it as kind of like a social good or a social need, when in fact, it's a very powerful economic force in our society. It has been not remarkably successful in that it's the only way to move large numbers of people on a consistent basis. The problem is that all transit is money losing. There's never been a transit agency in the world that made money. And as competition increases, transit agencies become more and more pressured as far as their finances go. This is not going to make it easier for transit companies. If people can get a driverless car to come to their home and drop them off at the doctor's office, it's going to be a challenge. People sometimes say, well, wait a minute, how does that work? How do we share rides when we have to get to the doctor's office? Well, one of the things that we were involved in a conversation a year or so ago is, let's say that you need to get to the doctor's office and you call up that Super Uber app that says in 4 minutes, they're going to have a car at your door and it's going to take you right to your doctor's office. And the cost of doing that is $6. Well, $6 is, pretty steep, $12 round trip. But what if there's one of the options is, well, if you share a ride with one other person, it's going to cost you $3. And if you share it with 2 other people, it's going to cost you $1. So in other words, you build in the pricing mechanism, how you would attract people to ride the thing, and also to get where they need to go. Now, the reason I bring that up in relation to transit is that when people talk about the demise of transit because of driverless cars, if that is going to occur, it's way down the road. This technology has to be perfected, it has to be adapted, and then it has to be adapted by a large part of society, okay? And then we have to get the pricing mechanism perfect, okay? So it is going to have an impact. I think it's going to be negative on transit, but that impact is years down the road. And who knows what's going to happen with transit in the next 25 years or 15 years. Maybe we no longer, and transit companies are doing this already. They're moving from the large buses to more small buses that can go into neighborhoods. And because of technology, they can pick up people and move them to where they're going in an efficient manner. Now, it's not perfected, obviously. Transit's still under a lot of pressure. But all in all, I think it's going to have a tough impact on transit. I think that's going to be down the road years. And we don't know how transit's going to be able to adapt because of its own technology.
Well, we're about to wrap up. I'm going to ask, and I'd like to leave you a little time for some closing remarks, but this final question from our audience, to some extent you've answered already, but I thought it was a particularly a good moment in the presentation about, we're thinking about this as technology, but you reframed it as the value to humanity, really. And so I know this question is one that you've answered to some extent, but if you could just say a little more about it. The question is, would individuals who currently cannot drive, such as older children, or people with disabilities such as blindness, be able to travel in autonomous cars alone or with others?
Absolutely. And I think when, I think of my mom. My mom, lucky enough that she lived to be 101. And one of the things she loved to do her whole life was ride in a car. We were one of those families that took a Sunday drive. And my dad didn't like it at all, but my mom loved it. And as she got older, one of the things she missed was the fact that she could not drive. And, she would call friends up. Well, friends go away, and, call family. Well, family can't always do that. well, that's just somebody who liked to ride. What about my mom if she didn't have family members around her that could get her to a doctor's appointment or to see friends, which she had, but she was lucky. She had family around her. But what about the people who can't get to a doctor's appointment because there's nobody to take them? That's the real power of this, because it doesn't just change our technology, it changes us to be better than what we are right now. Even though we're really good the way we are, it just makes us better to meet those needs of people who really, really need them. And in a strange way, one of the best things I've ever heard about this was over a few bourbons, and the guy said, one of the advantages of a driverless car is its impact on loneliness. And I thought that was pretty cool. So the societal benefits go far beyond saving gas miles and moving cargo more efficiently. And in a strange way, it all gets back to its impact on people's lives. And that's all that really matters.
Thank you. And if I just give you the mic for another moment, if there's any closing remarks.
No, I really do appreciate it. First of all, I'm never going to do this again because the questions were too hard. I only want simple questions, easy ones. But no, I really do appreciate the opportunity to talk about this. It's not a lecture, it's a discussion. And the questions were outstanding. And I really thank you for the opportunity to talk to you and your folks.
Well, thank you, Mark. We very much appreciate you being with us. This is really interesting and takes us into the future that's not too far away. So appreciate your time and expertise on this. I want to just remind, well, thank you, audience, for being with us. I know it's kind of pretty outside, and we'll remind you that if you want to watch this again, or if you have friends to whom you might say, boy, you sure missed the Northern Kentucky Forum that you should have watched, we will have a recording up on nkyforum.org so that people can watch it if they missed it tonight. So that's our little bow to technology to repost this. Also, invite everybody to our next forum, which is going to be on the evening of May the 25th at 6 p.m. When our topic is the changing landscape of film and theater. This is our second installment of a look at the arts in Greater Cincinnati. First installment was on live events, and now we'll look at the arts more generally, I should say, but film and theater. We have a good panel of folks from that sector talking with us on May the 25th. So hope you can be with us then. And meanwhile, thanks for tuning in with the forum. And we do look forward to the day when we can all be together and do this in person, but we're making it work. So Mark, thank you again.
Thank you very much.
Good night, everyone.
Good night.